on Facebook as well. Do we all understand that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just play a few notes and you tell me if it sounds okay? Because sometimes it squeaks. So okay, good.
Yeah.
That will appear later. Thank. I'm going to give it 3 minutes if that's okay with you. That makes it 10 past, and then if no one else has arrived, then I'll begin.
Yeah. I don't know what happened here. Yeah.
Are these monthly, Keith?
Lorna. Here we go. That'll do.
You've just been asked, are these monthly?
Are they?
Monthly.
Every week.
Oh wow!
Every week. Well, every week if they have someone available to do it. So I noticed that August the 8th was free about a month ago, so I volunteered to do this one, and
I'm guessing they can be from anywhere in the world, can they?
oh yeah, and anywhere. There's a top storyteller called Bubba Z who lives in Washington, and he normally comes to these sessions, and he's a real character, real showman. He's really good. So he's from Washington. Oh, you've of course Uda's met him because
Yeah. I met him twice.
been to the festival.
Yeah. Yeah,
And I'm just trying to think. Yeah, because there are several Zooms throughout the month, and I mean, Babs has been to a few where people from Scandinavia and Canada and America all fetch up, and you know, it's 9 o'clock at night, and they have to go off and do their lunch and things like that. You know.
Yeah. So how comes how did they get the link?
The other Zoom ones, the organizer sends out a link. This one is always done through the Storytelling Cafe in Marrakesh, the World Storytelling Cafe in Marrakesh. So the technician there has set this up.
I see.
I was there at a festival once. I was there on the Friday night, and 2 or 3 of us performed stories that were transmitted throughout. But if you can zoom yourself, if you can mute yourselves now, I will begin because I think it's 10 past and we're ready to roll. And I'll just introduce it. So my name is Keith, and I'm actually from Wolverhampton. On the website it says a storyteller from Birmingham. That's quite a long way away. And as I've just explained, this storytelling session is beamed from the World Storytelling Cafe in Marrakesh, and there are other events that are based in Marrakesh as well. And if you're in the city, you can visit the cafe, and they do nice food as well, nice vegan food for those of you who don't eat meat or anything else. But tonight it's my turn to tell stories for children. It's billed as, and as you already know, most stories are for everybody anyway, and certainly my stories will reflect that. So I will begin. Anita liked visiting her grandmother's house because it was a huge building with lots of rooms, and she could roam the corridors and explore. And it had a huge ramshackle garden that she liked to play in. But on this day, she was walking down a corridor, and there was a door ajar and a room that she hadn't been in before. And she walked in, and to her delight, it was full of books. Rows and rows and shelves of books. and a particular book caught her eye. On the spine, it said, "Stories with Children." And she was intrigued because she'd seen books which said children's stories or stories of children. Stories with children. She wondered what she might find inside. So she sat down on the floor and opened the first page, and there was a tin. And written on it was a word that she had never seen before. Now, she was 9 years old and described as a good reader at school. And when she came across a word she'd never seen before, she could decipher it. And she read the word aloud to herself. Titanium, she thought. I wonder what this is about. And she opened the first page and began to read. Maria was 4 years old and she lived in a farm on the outskirts of the town. And it was a huge, rambling farm, and her job was to feed the chickens. And she had just finished spreading the corn across the yard and watched the chickens rush it as though they'd never eaten before. She watched her father head off on his tractor to one of the faraway fields, and her mother walk toward the herb garden with a bag under her arm. And she walked into the kitchen, and there was a man she had never seen before. A man in a long blue overall which was splattered with paint. And he had a cloth cap on his head, and that had paint on it as well. And she was intrigued. And he was painting the closet door. He was dipping his brush into a tin on the floor, and then very carefully and very deliberately was painting the closet door. And it was so white. It was so white that as he came to the bottom, it made the rest of the kitchen doors look like a dull yellow. "Why," she said to him, "is it so white?" And he pointed with his brush to the tin and said, "This is titanium." And she walked forward and raised a finger, and he went, "Ah, you must not touch." Not in an angry voice, but a firm voice. And she took a pace back, and she watched as he turned to the cupboard. And she was amazed that this small tin would cover these big spaces. And she watched again as he turned the cupboard door into beautiful titanium white. And she stepped forward again, and he said, "Stop. You must not touch." "What's your name?" she said. Without turning round, he said, "Felice." "Felice," she said. "Is that a man's name?" "It's my name," he said, in a pleasant, conversational type of voice. She watched as the second cupboard door was covered in beautiful titanium white, and she couldn't resist. She stepped forward again and raised her finger, and he said, "Stop. You must not touch." Slightly firmer this time. And she stepped back and folded her arms and watched him painting. But then, before she could move, he put his brush down, put his hand in his overalls pocket, took out a piece of chalk, and he drew a circle around her. She looked down aghast. "Now," he said, Now you can stay in there, and that's where you watch from. She looked at the circle, and she looked up at his back as he painted the second cupboard door, and she knew she could not get out of this circle. After a while, when he had finished the second cupboard door, he put his paintbrush across the tin, balancing. He picked up a box from the kitchen table and went out at the kitchen door. She saw the back of his head as he sat on the bench just outside the kitchen door. And there she was on her own in the kitchen in the circle. She watched as he started eating his sandwiches and heard him humming tunelessly, and she sat down on the floor. She reached out a finger and touched the chalk of the circle and then withdrew it. She sat cross-legged on the floor, not knowing what to do, trapped in the circle. Eventually, he finished his sandwiches and he came back in. He picked up his tin and his paintbrush and he set to work on another cupboard door. "Mister," she said quietly. "Mister, can I come out now?" He turned, almost surprised that she was still there, laughed to himself. He took a rag out of his pocket and wiped the circle away. It was as though a magician had made it disappear in a puff of smoke. She stood up and looked at the kitchen, which was gradually turning beautiful titanium white, and smiled and laughed because she was free. "Thank you, mister," she said, and she skipped out of the room into the yard, her freedom complete. Anita sat for a moment looking at the book. Titanium, which is what she thought the word was pronounced, was a fascinating thing. She had learnt a new word, titanium paint. She must ask her grandmother about that when she goes downstairs. But she turned the next page, and there was a little white cottage on the edge of a wood, and outside the cottage was a figure with a cloak and a hood. "Oh," she thought to herself, "I wonder what this story is about." And she turned the page and began to read. Once upon a time, there was a small girl who had a red cloak with a red hood. And she lived with her mother in a small white cottage on the edge of the wood. And she often went on errands into the village. And the people in the village who liked to give people nicknames called her Red Riding Hood. And she liked that name. And she liked her cloak and her hood. And when she was 10, her grandmother, who lived in the wood, in a lovely large house, for her husband had been a woodcutter and was prosperous. And for her 10th birthday, she gave her a brooch with a beautiful red glass stone. And she used that brooch to tie up her cloak. But the people in the village, who liked a rumour and a bit of gossip, decided that this was a ruby. Imagine giving a 10-year-old girl a ruby to walk around with, something so valuable. She would be in danger all the time, they thought. But Red Riding Hood's mother did not think this, for she knew that stone was glass. Now on this day, where our story begins, her grandmother was ill. So her mother packed up a wicker basket of food for her so she wouldn't have to cook or even fend for herself. And she gave it to Red Riding Hood, and she said to her, "Now then, you go straight to your grandmother's house. You stay on the track. You've been there lots of times. You know the way, but don't go into the woods, for there are wolves in the wood." Red Riding Hood nodded obediently, but she had never seen a wolf in the woods, and the grown-ups were always warning her about wolves. But she set off. Now, what she didn't know, and what her mother didn't know, is a woodcutter, a huge brute of a man, had overheard this conversation and had decided that he was going to have that brooch for himself, for it must be worth a fortune if it's a ruby brooch. He set off on a different route. Meanwhile, Red Riding Hood is halfway there when she hears a whimpering sound, almost like a child crying, and she stops and listens. And the sound is pathetic. The whimpering of a child. It can't be a child. But she still feels sorry for whatever animal is in distress. And she goes, not following her mother's instructions, she goes into the woods and finds herself in the clearing. And there, in the clearing, is a wolf. And a wolf who is slumped on the floor. And a wolf who is pushing at its paw. And she can see a large thorn embedded in that paw. And the wolf can't get the thorn out. Now, although she is frightened and her heart is thumping, she knows she must help that wolf. And she strides forward, taking her courage to her. And she takes hold of the thorn and she pulls it out. And the wolf shudders and slumps to the floor, and there are little spots of blood in the dust around its paw. But she doesn't look back because she's frightened, and she goes straight back to the track and heads for her grandmother's house. Now the woodcutter has arrived there already, and he has gone through the front door, up the stairs, and manhandled her grandmother into a cupboard. And he has climbed into the bed with her grandmother's bonnet on, and the covers up to his eyes. When Red Riding Hood arrived at the cottage, she went through the door and called out, "Grandmother, grandmother!" And a gruff voice from upstairs said, "Up here, my dear." "Oh my goodness," she said, walking up the stairs. "Your voice sounds terrible." "Don't try and talk, grandmother. I've bought some food for you." And she gets into the bedroom, and there is the woodcutter, filling the bed, covered in the blankets, with his bonnet on. And she gasps and looks at him. But before she can speak, he throws off the covers, grabs his axe, and shouts, "Enough of this! Give me that brooch!" And he jumps out of the bed. Now Red Riding Hood knows this house, and she runs from room to room, escaping from the woodcutter. But he is closing in on her. Eventually, she is in the kitchen, and she is back against the hob, and the woodcutter raises his axe, and the back door bursts open. And through it comes the wolf. And the wolf springs onto the woodcutter and grabs the shaft of his axe in its teeth. and the two roll and crash around the room, knocking plates out of the dresser and chairs over, and all the while Red Riding is standing there with eyes like saucers and mouth agape. But eventually the wolf wrenches the axe from the woodcutter's grasp, and she bites him on the shoulder. And the woodpuffer, with a scream of pain, jumps up and runs out of the door. And the wolf, breathing heavily after this fight, gets to his feet, and he looks at Red Riding Hood, and she looks at him, and he just nods and walks out of the door. Now, meanwhile, Red Riding Hood's grandmother has escaped from the cupboard, and she has heard the commotion, and she has come down the stairs. And as she comes into the kitchen, she sees the wolf's tail vanish out of the door, and she sees the commotion that has been caused with the chairs and the broken plates. And she says what every grandmother in the world would say at this moment. Well, dear, after an adventure like that, I think we should have a nice cup of tea. Anita sat and looked at the book. She had never read a story where the wolf was the hero. Every story she had ever read, the wolf was the villain. And she had grown up to be frightened of wolves, even though there were no wolves in the country she lived in. How odd was that? And she turned the page, and there on the page was a picture of a bucket. Bucket, she thought to herself. What sort of story is that going to be? Picture of a bucket? And she turned the page and she began to read. Eric was not a baby anymore. No one called him Eki. They called him Eric. And he was 6 years old, and he had his own room. And in his own room, he had a shelf with books on it. Some of them he could actually read. And he had a huge box with Lego in it. And there was even talk at Christmas of getting Lego Technic. And he'd seen that in an older class at school. He loved school. He loved learning to read and write and add up and play with his friends. And he lived in a nice house in a nice street. He played with the other children, and they played in each other's houses and gardens. What a fine life for a little boy. Apart from Thursdays. Because Thursdays, the pig man came. Now, he didn't know what the pig man was like, but each day, each week on a Thursday, he would sidle off to his room just before tea time. And he would sit there and he would wait, and he would hear the back gate go, and then a tap on the kitchen door, and he would hear his mother talking to the pig man. And his mother, who's usually so sensible, seemed to like the pig man. She spoke to him and they laughed sometimes. But what is a pig man? Is a pig man the head of a pig and the body of a human being? Is the pig man the head of a man and the body of a pig? Or is it half? Does the pig man stand up on human legs but have trotters and a nose like a pig, but his imagination made him frightened even more every time he thought of the pig man. And every Thursday he dreaded the pig man coming. But every Thursday he crept to his room and sat on his bed and waited to hear the door shut and the gate at the end of the path creak shut, and he knew the pig man would be gone, and he would go down. And surprisingly, there is his mother, looking cheerful, having had yet another encounter with the pig man. Until this day. For this day he did sit there on his bed, and he heard the back door shut, and he heard the gate at the end of the path creak shut too, and the pig man had gone. So he came down, a sense of relief. And then his mother turned to him and said, "Ah, Eric." And in her hand she held a paper bag, and in the paper bag were potato peelings. And she said, Eric, run after the pig man. He's only just left, because I forgot to put these in his bucket. Eric's heart sank. How could his mother do this to him? "Come on then," she said, "come on, otherwise he'll be gone." And he went out through the back door and walked down the path. He opened the gate that creaked. And as he looked down the alleyway at the back of the houses, he could see the back of a figure receding, a figure hunched over, carrying a bucket. He half ran, half walked, wanted to stop, called up, "Mr. Pigman, Mr. Pigman!" And the figure stopped and slowly turned around. And as he looked, he saw the face of an old man with a cloth cap on his head. He saw two ordinary old man's hands holding a bucket, wearing an old overcoat. My mum forgot to give you these," he said in a croaking, scared voice. And the old man smiled down at him and said, "Ah, potato peelings from the old porkers." And he poured the potato peels into his bucket and handed the paper bag back. "Mind you," he said, "mind you, can't give 'em apple peels or orange peels, 'cause that gives them a pain in their belly, the poor old porkers." "Thank you, sonny," he said, and he turned around to walk away. Walk away from a small boy stood in an alley, realizing that the reason he was called the pig man was because he had pigs. A wave of relief spread over him as he turned to walk home, through the gate that creaked and up the path and through the kitchen door. And he said to his mum, "Mum, he's called the pig man because he's got pigs." And his mother laughed down at him and said, "Of course he is, dear." And he learnt on that day that greatest lesson in life, that if you are frightened of something, then you must share it. Anita liked this story. Imagine the pig man. And she was a young girl herself who was frightened of things and knew what it felt like to harbour unreasonable fears. But she turned the page and looked down, and there was a man, a picture of a man standing on the bridge. A man standing on the bridge with a pipe in his hand. She thought, "Oh, I think I may know this story." But it's always fun to read a story you know well, isn't it? She turned the page and began to read. The piper stood on the bridge and wondered why he had been sent for to get rid of rats, because rats are everywhere. They are in barns, and they are in cellars, and they are down by rivers, but they are timid beasts that run away when a human approaches. But as he stepped off the bridge and spoke to the riverman by his boat, he could actually see what they meant, because there, on the lawns by the river, there were hundreds of rats. And as he walked across the square, he could see down a street there were rats running in and out of the shops, and people were chasing them with brooms out of their houses. They were everywhere. And he understood. He walked up the stone steps of the town hall and in through huge oak doors. Inside, he was shown into the council chamber, and there was the mayor. There was the mayor with his long robe with a fur collar and a gold chain. And either side of him were his councillors. "I have come to kill your rats," said the piper, "but there is a price." The councillors and the mayor's eyes widened when the piper told them the price. But they knew it had to be done. The townsfolk were furious that nothing was being done with this epidemic of rats. So they agreed, and they watched as the piper walked out of the council chamber, out through the oak doors, and down the steps of the town hall. And he stood on a stone bench on the edge of the square, and he took his pipe and he played. And the rats came. The rats came from the lawns and the cellars and the bakeries and the houses, and they came following the music, and they were running and squealing and pushing and shoving until the entire square was covered with rats. And he carried on playing, and he stepped off the bench and walked toward the river. And the rats followed, and the rats followed even when he stepped into the boat, and the boatman rowed him out into the middle of the river, and they couldn't stop themselves. They had to follow him. And before long, when the boat was almost at the opposite bank, there was a raft of tiny grey dead rats floating down the river toward the sea. The boatman rowed him back to the bank and he paid him. Then he walked back across the square and up the town hall steps and into the council chamber. But this time, there were two burly men standing either side of the door, and they tensed as he walked in. The mayor was standing with his councillors, looking smug. A councillor at the end even sniggered. But the piper walked in. And the mayor, raising himself, puff-chested, said, "We have decided that in fact, it was the river that killed the rats. Now, as a gesture of goodwill, we will give you a quarter of your fee. And he held out a leather purse holding coin. And the piper looked at it. And he looked at the councillors, who were looking very pleased with themselves. Without taking the purse, he turned and walked out of the council chamber and out of the town hall. And the people of the town, hearing about this saving a fortune, thought the mayor and his councillors had been very clever to trick the piper. They saved all that money. Well, isn't that their job? They got rid of the rats and they saved all that money. And everyone thought it was a great wheeze until the next morning the piper appeared on the stone bench again, and this time he played a different tune. And this time the children came. And they came from the playgrounds, and they came from the schoolyards, and they came from helping their mother with the baking or playing with their parents in the garden. And they came and they smiled and they laughed and they skipped. And they all assembled in the square listening to the piper play his tune. And brothers and sisters held hands as the piper stepped from the stone bench and he carried on playing. And the children skipped and ran and danced after him as he crossed the bridge over the river and took the road out of the town, far up into the hills, until he came to a stone wall. And there he held up his pipe above his head. And with a great grinding noise, a stone door slid open. And there inside was a fairground and tables with cake and ice cream. And with a huge roar of delight, the children ran into the cavern. And when the last one was in, he raised his pipe again, and the great stone door ground its way back again. And he turned, but it wasn't the last child, for there was a small boy with a wooden crutch who hadn't been able to keep up. And the piper nodded to himself and thought, now he will tell them. A hollow silence fell over the town. As people walked past empty playgrounds and empty schoolyards, and parents heard noises in their garden and looked out the window and hoping to see a child playing and knew that could not be so. And the mayor was not immune. The mayor got up each morning at dawn and he put on a robe and he walked down the corridor and opened the door, and there were 2 small beds empty. And he felt the huge weight of responsibility for the rest of the day until he repeated it the next morning. But his wife took control. His wife said to him, we must find a way of paying the piper. And he said, yes, we'll pay him twice as much, 3 times as much. You don't understand. You don't understand. It is a mystical sum. We must give him exactly the amount he looks for. And the money was gathered, and the 2 messengers were sent to find the piper. And the town held its breath. And the first day, silence. The second day, nothing. And on the third day, the mayor put on his robe at dawn, and he walked down the corridor, and when he opened the door, there were two small heads on the pillows. And a ripple like a peal of bells spread across the town as parents found their children in their beds. Children who had no memory of their adventure, who all thought they had gone to bed the night before in the normal way. And there was a great celebration for one day. And after it, they never spoke of it. But they raised a statue in the town square of the musician. The statue to remind them of the price you pay if you cheat the piper. Oh, well, thought Anita, what an exciting end. What an exciting end to that story. How wonderful is that? Oh, she could see the book was a huge fat book and there were many more stories, but she turned another page. And there was a picture of a blue violin. Oh, she was intrigued now. She'd never seen a blue violin. Blue violins are brown. She turned the page again and began to read. We are in Cremona, in northern Italy, and it is the year 1760. The square is cobbled, and in the distance there is a magnificent church, and either side there are stone arches, and above the arches are the rooms where the merchants do their business. It's early morning, and the sound is broken by the clatter of hooves and wooden wheels as a caravan makes its way into the square. The caravan, driven by a man with a red shirt and white trousers, and there's a woman sitting next to him with a white blouse and red skirt. And they stop in the square and they start putting their wares out. Lucky heather for your door, and pegs and pots and pans, and people walk past and they look, but they don't stop until a small boy steps onto a platform at the back of the caravan and he begins to play a blue violin. He holds it to his chest and he draws the bow back and forth, and the music swirls around the square and soars into the air. And a crowd gathers listening to the music. There is an old man at the back of the crowd, an instrument maker, and he is delighted. He has not heard a violin played so beautifully for a long time, and by such a small boy. And as people stand and listen to the music, they remember they do need another pot or a pan, or you can't have too many pegs, can you? And it's always a good idea to have a bit of lucky heather over your door, and business is brisk. But in one of the offices above the arches, there is a merchant, a big man in a long robe with a fur collar, and he is working on his ledger. A man whose only talent is to get people to part with their money. And he hears the music and he grumbles and he gets up and he shuts the window. Now, as the day goes on, a rumour spreads. That violin is magic. For who ever heard of a blue violin? And that beautiful music played by that tiny boy, that violin is magic. And the people of Cremona rather like the idea of having a magic violin in their town. Now it is night time, and the square is silent, apart from the sounds of the family sleeping in their caravan. But there is a figure walking along the arches, a figure dressed all in black, no long robe this time, no fur collar. And the figure walks stealthily across the square and reaches in to the caravan. And he takes the violin and the bow, turns and walks back across the square, up a side street where he has a horse waiting. He climbs on his horse and he rides out of the town. He rides into the woods, and even at that time of night he rides right into the woods until he finds a clearing. Then he dismounts and he takes the violin to his chest as he saw the boy do, and he takes the bow and he draws it back and forth across the strings. And the sound is horrible. He tries to move his fingers on the neck of the violin as he saw the boy do when he was playing that beautiful music, and it sounds worse. He becomes furious now. He becomes angry and his teeth are gritted, and he rakes the bow back and forth across the strings, and the sound is horrendous. And in his fury, he takes it by the neck and he smashes it against a tree and he throws it into the undergrowth. He stands for a moment composing himself as his heart beats faster, and he climbs onto his horse and he rides back to the town. The next morning, the silence of the square is broken by a small boy crying, by his parents angrily putting their wares away and shutting the shutters of the caravan. A crowd gathers, and they are horrified. Someone has stolen the boy's violin. Soon it will be news across northern Italy that Cremona is the kind of town where someone would steal a small boy's violin. They are all talking at once. There is a babble of noise until they part. For there is the old man, the instrument maker, and he has a violin case in his hand, and he walks through the crowd who step back to let him through. The father goes to speak, but his wife touches his arm. The old man approaches the boy and opens the case, and there is a beautiful, gleaming, brand new brown violin. And he hands it to the boy, who takes it. And he takes the bow, and he sniffs back a tear. And he begins to draw the bow back and forth across the strings. And the music swirls around the square and soars into the air. And the crowd clap and cheer in appreciation and relief. But above the square, a window slams shut. Anita sits back. And she liked the story. But why did the man who had smashed the violin get away with it? Why did he get off scot-free when he smashed the boy's violin? She was about to turn to see the next picture when she heard her grandmother call from downstairs. "Time for tea, Anita." Reluctantly, Anita closed the book and put it back on the shelves. But she knew by its thickness that there were lots more stories for her to read with children when she came to her grandmother's the next time. Thank you. Stories with children. Hello, Evita. Nice to see you. Hi, Baden.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. That's great.
Thank
Hi,
you, everyone,
Keith.
for coming along. It's
Hi,
been
Keith. You know how much I love that story.
I know, Baden. When I saw your name pop up, I thought, oh, good, because I knew that was going to be my last story that she was going to read. So
I got here late and came in halfway through the Pied Piper story, and I thought, oh, he's doing a story about music, surely. And then I love that story to bits.
yeah, thank you very
man.
much.
Great to see you.
Yeah, I'd like to hear you, because Baden tells that story, and I'd like to hear you tell it one day.
Now, Keith gave me that story and said, and gave me permission to tell it. So would I, Keith. So would I.
A long time ago.
Yeah.
So I was going to say Baden and Evita are a couple of our Marrakesh friends, but we see you all over the place, don't we, Baden, at the various festivals.
Kate, I
Lovely.
loved your version of the Little Red Riding Hood because as a child myself, my grandmother taught me going outside with a bowl of jam, and she said, "What on earth are you doing?" And I looked at her, wondering if I'm in trouble. But I went outside to put the jam out for the wolf so he wouldn't have to eat the little girl, because the wolf was not really a baddie. He was trying to help Little Red Riding Hood. So I love that. And as I wrote, there is actually a women's version
Yeah. Well,
where the woodsman is not after the ruby, I can tell you that.
it's Norman Perrin, who's from Toronto. We meet at the festival always. He told me once, a long time ago now, that he was in a children's hospital telling stories, and a little boy asked him to tell Red Riding Hood, and he thought, "Oh, good, I know that story." And then the boy said, "But I want the wolf to be the hero."
Yes.
So I thought to myself, right, how can I do that? So that was how I jigged that story. But that was so Norman, and luckily we on a Zoom last year, it was Norman's birthday. And so I was able to tell that story for his birthday as well, which is
that was wonderful. Thank you. I enjoyed that. I've got to go back to my mama. See you guys.
Yeah. Bye bye. Yep.
Bye.
Thank you. It's 7 o'clock now, so it's time to wind up anyway. But thank you all for coming. Nice crowd. So Baden, most of the other people here are our chums who are known as Rent-A-Crowd, because every time anyone does anything, usually musical, I have to say, a whole crowd turns up to be part of it. And I think you met Uda in Marrakesh at the first festival I came to.
I met him.
And he's the one I get my Egyptian stories from.
Always good to see you, Keith.
Yeah, thanks, Brady. Yeah, always good to see you. It's great.
See you soon.
Cheers then. Bye-bye then.
Bye.
Great stuff, Keith.
Okay.
Evita the Greek one?
Evita is Australian, isn't it?
Australian, not the Greek one.
Yeah, Despina's the Greek person.
Yeah.
And we saw Salma.
Yes.
We sent you a photo, didn't you, when we were in Marrakesh? She was delighted to be told that we were going to tell you we'd seen her.
Yeah. Okay.
Bye. Bye. Yeah, oh, not at all. Thanks for coming along. It's been great. I've loved it. Bye, Lucy. Oh.